Welcome to this explainer. I am incredibly excited you're here today because we're taking a deep dive into one of the absolute most fascinating subjects in all of science. We're going to look at exactly how our brains process reality. I mean, think about it for a second. Every single color you see, every note of music you hear, every texture you feel, it all stems from these highly coordinated, insanely complex mechanisms happening inside your head right now. So today, we're going to put on our professor hats and really get into the weeds, teaching the fundamental mechanisms and principles of neural sensory processing. So how does a sound wave actually become a thought? Or how does a single photon of light become an image in your mind? Because, the outside world is really just this chaotic storm of physical and chemical energy. It's completely meaningless on its own. Your brain is locked away in the dark, absolutely silent vault of your skull, and it has to somehow make sense of all that chaos. It has to catch that external energy, translate it, and actively construct the reality you're experiencing every single second. Here is our information pipeline for today. Part 1, translating the outside world. Part 2, the brain's secret code. Part 3, routing and refining the signals. And Part 4, your adaptable, dynamic brain.
Okay, let's jump right into Part 1, translating the outside world. It all starts with this concept called transduction. Basically, this is the process where an environmental stimulus causes an electrical response in a sensory receptor cell. You can kind of think of transduction as your body's universal translator. Your brain doesn't actually speak light or sound or pressure. It only speaks one language, and that language is electricity. The specific nature of this translation mechanism is exactly what defines the sensitivity of your entire sensory system. Let's ground this with a couple of really cool micro-scenarios to understand the depth of what's happening at the cellular level. Transduction uses totally different cellular tools depending on the sense, even though the final electrical goal is exactly the same. For example, when you taste something salty, chemical tastins just pass directly through specific ion channels right on your tongue. But if we look at vision, the photoreceptors in your eye utilize something called cyclic nucleotide-gated ion channels to convert light stimuli into membrane potential changes. And what's crazy is that the olfactory receptor cells in your nose use those exact same types of cyclic channels to detect smells. So you've got completely different tools, but the exact same incredible electrical goal. So once that physical energy is captured, it creates what we call receptor potentials. These are just the initial electrical shifts inside the cell. But here's the catch. A little shift isn't enough on its own. It has to reach a very specific threshold to trigger an action potential, a spike, that actually propagates inward to your central nervous system. Take the ear, for example. You've got these microscopic hair cells that physically bend to convert the mechanical energy of sound waves into a change in membrane polarization. And if that shift hits the threshold, boom, the signal is sent straight inward. All right, moving on to Section 2, the brain's secret code. Since individual sensory cells are broadly tuned, meaning they respond to a whole bunch of different stimuli, your brain can't just rely on a single perfect neuron to tell it what's happening. Instead, it brilliantly decodes these incoming signals using 4 primary strategies: population coding, spatial mapping, temporal coding, and intensity coding. Let's break those down. First, you've got power in numbers in speed. Population coding represents sensory info by comparing the activity of a massive population of neurons. By comparing the relative response rates of many of these broadly tuned cells, your brain can unambiguously distinguish between thousands of distinct flavors or odors. Think about it like taking a massive poll. Then you have intensity coding, like how loud is a sound or how heavy is a touch. Your brain figures this out by looking at the firing rate of individual neurons and the total number of active neurons. So louder sounds literally equal faster firing and a lot more receptors joining the chorus. Now, what is truly mind-blowing is how your brain physically organizes all this data. It uses spatial mapping. The brain actually maintains the physical layout of your sensory organs right there in the neural tissue. The visual system uses retinotopy to map your visual field. The auditory system uses tonotopy to physically map out sound frequencies, almost like the keys on a piano. And the somatic system uses somatopy to literally map out your physical body. By keeping everything physically mapped out like this, the brain can super efficiently connect related neurons and save precious axonal length. It's an absolute masterpiece of biological engineering. The final piece of the code is temporal coding, where timing is literally everything. The exact timing and the pattern of those electrical spikes encode highly specific features. In the auditory system, for example, neurons use a totally fascinating trick called phase locking. Basically, they fire at the exact same phase of an incoming sound wave to encode low-frequency sounds.
So the internal rhythm of the neuron perfectly matches the physical rhythm of the world outside.
That brings us to Section 3, routing and refining the signals. Let's see how this info actually travels up the hierarchy. Sensory information doesn't just smash into the whole brain all at once. It moves in very defined sequential stages. It starts at the primary sensory neurons right at your body's surface. Then it travels to integration stages in the brainstem or the spinal cord. Next, it hits the thalamus, which is often referred to as the gateway to the cerebral cortex. And finally, it reaches the primary sensory cortex. And here is a super vital takeaway about this whole architecture. As information moves up this hierarchy, the neuronal receptive fields get larger and exponentially more complex. But it's not just one single file line. We have to contrast this hierarchical, sequential processing with parallel processing. Your brain employs a brilliant division of labor strategy. Different attributes of a single stimulus are processed simultaneously along completely distinct pathways. Just look at your visual system. It has parallel streams actively analyzing light, processing color, and mapping out fine details all at the exact same time. And these distinct streams remain totally segregated as they pass through the thalamus and right up into the visual cortex.
And speaking of the thalamus, we really need to clear up a common misconception here. Relay stations in the brain are not just passive wires or simple conduits. The thalamus actively transforms information through a process called lateral inhibition. This is where neighboring cells actually actively inhibit one another. By turning down the volume of surrounding cells, the strongest signal really pops out, which greatly enhances contrast and sharpens your brain's perception of stimulus borders. Your brain is essentially running a real-time photo editing filter on reality, just to make the edges crisper. Finally, Section 4, your adaptable, dynamic brain. A totally fundamental principle across all of your senses is adaptation. This is when there's a decreased neural response despite the continued presence of a stimulus. Just think about when you put your clothes on this morning. You felt them for a few seconds, and then you just completely stopped feeling them. The brain deliberately decreases the neural response to steady background noise so it can heavily prioritize sudden changes. Because if a bug lands on your arm, well, you need to feel that instantly, not just the steady, boring pressure of your shirt sleeve. Plus, this whole sensory processing system is heavily influenced by top-down modulation, meaning your attention and your alertness literally change how your senses work. Higher-order brain areas create what are called priority maps that actively reach down and enhance the sensitivity of neurons in your sensory cortex to specific locations or specific features. Like when you're trying to spot a friend wearing a bright red hat in a super crowded room, your brain boosts that red signal while aggressively filtering out all the other irrelevant visual noise. So the really crucial point here is that sensory maps are not fixed at all. They can be completely reorganized based on experience or injury. This is neuroplasticity in action. The ultimate example of this dynamic nature is seen in blind individuals. Without visual input coming in, the brain doesn't just let the visual cortex sit there doing nothing. It can reorganize itself and actively recruit those traditional visual areas to process the highly complex somatic sensations required for reading Braille. The brain literally repurposes its own hardware. So we've gone from the raw physical energy of the outside world, translated it into electricity, decoded it by using complex populations and maps, routed it up through a massive neural hierarchy, and dynamically adjusted it based on your attention and experience. Which leaves us with this final, crazy thought. If experience literally rewires the brain, how will the specific things you focused on today reshape your sensory maps tomorrow? The very act of focusing on this explainer has fired pathways in your brain that might literally be altering how you perceive the world going forward. Keep learning, keep focusing, and thank you so much for diving into the incredible neural processing of the brain with me today.